Hey everyone, Keith here, Tips and Tricks HQ. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to turn on debugging for the WP eStore plugin. Now this allows you to test transactions. During a transaction there's a lot of moving parts that happen. So what we can do is turn on debugging, allow the tool to write to log files so we can actually see what happens each step of the way and to determine if there's any failure along the way so we can pinpoint the problem and rectify it. Alright, so the first thing we want to do, the way it works when you're using PayPal as the payment processor, it uses what's called instant payment notification, or IPN, and that communicates back to WP eStore after a transaction and gives WP eStore the information for that transaction to allow WP eStore to process it and also create log files if debugging is turned on. So that's a key step in this process for debugging. So we want to make sure that is set up. So right here I'm in my PayPal account, and this may look slightly different based on the country that you're in. I'm in Canada, so this is how it looks for me. It may be slightly different for the US or other countries, but it's quite similar. And what I did to get here, I went to Profile and Settings, and then I chose My Selling Tools from the left side. And as you can see under here, under Getting Paid and Managing My Risk, Instant Payment Notifications, I'm going to click on Update there. I already have IPN turned on in my account, but I can click on Edit Settings. And then make sure Receive IPN Messages is on. So just choose that option, click on Save if it isn't already on. And the notification URL isn't relevant because WP eStore encodes that in the checkout button, so then it overrides that value anyway, so don't worry about the notification URL. Just make sure that IPN is in fact turned on in PayPal, and that's all you need to do for that. Okay, and beyond that, in order to make sure IPN will actually function, you have to make sure that your website is publicly available. It may appear to be when you're logged in as admin, because generally when you're logged in as admin, it overrides the behavior of anybody else coming in from the outside. So if you have any coming soon or maintenance plugins installed and activated, for example, it may appear as though the site works for you, but it is not accessible by the public. Therefore, it's not accessible by PayPal or IPN. So IPN won't function, therefore you cannot do any debugging. So just make sure that your website is not password protected, or it's not on a local computer or anything like that. Just make sure it's publicly accessible. Deactivate any maintenance plugins when you're doing your debugging. Alright, and also if there's any old or previous versions of WP eStore within your plugins folder, even if they're not activated, they may interfere with the process of debugging and actual transactions on a live site. So just make sure there's no old versions of the plugin installed. Regardless of whether they're activated, you want to remove those, get those out of there, delete them, and just keep the most up-to-date current version installed and activated in there. Alright, so once those housekeeping steps are in place, then we want to actually turn on debugging and post-payment processing. So in order to do that, within your WordPress dashboard, go to WP eStore Settings, and then you'll be in the General Settings tab. So we're going to scroll down really close to the bottom here. We're going to make sure that debugging is enabled. It's not enabled by default, so we're going to make sure that's turned on. And then just above that, we want to make sure that automatic post-payment processing is also turned on. And then click on Update Options. A good idea also at this point is to reset the log files so we're not confused by any entries that exist in there. Although they are date and time stamped, it's a good idea to reset them just to make sure that we're looking at fresh data when we're looking at the log files. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the log files now. Okay, and now let's make sure that those log files are actually writable, and a quick way to test that is to visit the IPN URL directly. And when we visit that URL directly, what WP eStore will do is write an entry to the log file. So let's go ahead and do that. The way to get to it is to go to your actual website address, and then at the end of the address put in $eStore _pp _IPN equals process. So I'm going to grab that URL, and remember the beginning part is your website address, and then you just put on this value there, and that'll trigger the IPN script. And since we're accessing it directly, WP eStore knows that we're just going to write to the file just to make sure that it's actually writable. So let's visit that URL here, and it's also going to let us know if the debug is enabled, which it is, which we knew, and then it actually outputs some data to the IPN _handle _debug log file. So it puts some data in there for us so we can go check that out and make sure it actually is present. And if it is, that indicates that it is a writable file, so the permissions are set. So we'll go ahead and look for that right now. So in general settings, again, in WP eStore, scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's the log file here. If we open that in a browser, it may end up being blank. So let's just save that to our computer. I'm right-clicking Save Link As. It might be Save File As on your system, and I'm going to save that right to the desktop so I can find it easily. I have .log files associated with opening in a text editor. So I'm just going to double click that, and it's going to open up right in the text file, and there's an advisory message at the top, and this is when we reset the log file. So that's what happened there at that precise time. And also, and since we went directly to the IPN URL, this is what gets put into the log file there to indicate that this file is in fact writable. So I'm going to close that and remove that. But if there is no data within those files, it indicates that the permissions aren't set. An easy, quick way to set those permissions is to log into your server through FTP and browse to the plugins folder. So once you log in, you'll see WP-content. So I'm going to go into that folder there, and then into plugins. WP cart for digital products is the name of the folder for WP eStore. And near the bottom, we'll see the log files. IPN handle debug. We're going to want to set the right permissions for all of them. But what you can do is just right click the file, click on File Permissions, and make sure it's at least 644 for the numeric value there. This one's set up as 664. That's good. Once you change that value, just click on OK, and it'll make sure that the right permissions are set. Proper permissions are set so that the file is writable. And that's really all you have to do. Then you can close the FTP software after that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is do a test transaction and show you what the actual log file is with real data in there. So I have a product set up here. I'm going to refresh the page, and I have it set up as costing 1 cent. So I'm going to go through this process here, the transaction, and then I'll show you the log files immediately after that. Alright, I'm back. Off camera I did a test transaction, a live test transaction. I had created a product with a dollar or a penny, I can't remember, and went through the process. So now what I'm going to do is download the log files to make sure everything processed as expected. So I'm going to download the IPN handle debug as well as the eStore post payment. And just make sure that all the information was written to these files. So open with TextPad, let's see. So as expected, all the transaction information is present here, and everything shows up as success. So this was a successful transaction, so my debug tells me that everything is working as expected. And I'll open this one as well. and all the information is valid in there as well. So everything was successful. Alright, that's all there is to enabling debugging with WP eStore. Again, this is Keith, Tips and Tricks HQ. Thanks for watching.